There is a particular kind of foolishness in riding a fixed bicycle into terrain that seems specifically designed to reject it. Mud, roots, wet grass, broken bridleways, farm tracks, with the texture of old porridge, climbs steep enough to make the front wheel mutter existential threats. None of this asks for a brakeless or minimally brake Tracklocross machine. None of it is improved by a 48 by 17 gear. None of it becomes more efficient because the rider has chosen purity over practicality. Tracklocross is not merely cycling with fewer options. It is not gravel riding with a punishment fetish, nor cyclocross with the gears confiscated by a stern metaphysician. At its most spiritually concentrated, Tracklocross is the art of going somewhere that does not reward arrival. It is the pursuit of terrain that refuses optimization. It is a decision to pedal towards a place that solves nothing, proves nothing, and may not even be the place in any meaningful sense. This is geographic nihilism, the rejection of destination as moral authority. Geographic nihilism does not mean hating places, it means refusing to worship destinations. It means stepping away from the assumption that movement needs a productive endpoint in order to be meaningful. The geographic nihilist does not ride to a hill because the hill is important. The hill is not important. The hill is a lump of geological inconvenience. The rider does not ride to the woods because the woods contain revelation. The woods mostly contain nettles, trees, dog walkers, and a quiet sense of unease. The rider does not ride to the dead end because the dead end has answers. It has none. And that is its gift. The dead end makes no demand. It does not pretend to be useful. It does not decorate itself with purpose. It simply stops. To ride there deliberately is to experience a peculiar freedom. You arrive, discover that arrival has no consequence, turn around and continue. The world has not changed, your social status has not improved, your average speed has probably gone down a bit, your drivetrain is making a noise like a spoon in a cement mixer, but something has been loosened. The pressure to justify the ride has cracked. Tracklocross thrives in this crack. It asks us to reconsider the relationship between effort and reward. Ordinarily, effort seeks compensation. You climb for the view, you train for the race, you commute for the workplace, you suffer for the achievement. But Tracklocross often offers effort without compensation. You climb because the climb is there and because your gear ratio makes walking seem both sensible but sadly humiliating. The reward is not external, it is not waiting at the end. The reward is a strange purity of purposeless effort. There is comedy in Tracklocross, and any philosophy of it that ignores the comedy becomes instantly unbearable. One cannot speak too solemnly about spiritual enlightenment while shouldering a track bike over a stile, slipping in mud, and realising that the bridleway ahead is less a path and more a rumour maintained by the local sheep. The rider is ridiculous. The bicycle is ridiculous. The chosen terrain is ridiculous. But this absurdity is not a weakness. It is the thing itself. The comedy of Tracklocross emerges from disproportion. A machine associated with velodromes, alley cats, urban speed, and clean lines is dragged into woods where it plainly does not belong. The fixed drivetrain, so graceful and smooth tarmac, becomes a stubborn little metronome of consequence. Every route interrupts, every rut negotiates, every descent asks whether surrender or control is currently winning. The rider becomes both pilgrim and punchline. This is why Tracklocross has a certain existential flavour, the absurd. In the philosophical sense, it emerges when human beings seek meaning in a world that does not provide it on request. The Tracklocross rider seeks a line through terrain that appears to have no interest in lines. There is something magnificent in continuing when the activity has become indefensible. Not dangerous for its own sake, not reckless, not macho, but indefensible in the ordinary accounting of practicality. Why not use gears? Why not take a better bike? Why ride here? Why this path? Why this ratio? Why this mess? The honest answer is because it strips the ride back to its raw nerve. A geared bike can sometimes make difficulty negotiable. A fixed gear bike makes difficulty intimate. There is no hiding from cadence. The rider cannot coast through discomfort. Even descending becomes participation. The pedals keep turning, the body remains implicated. The bike does not allow the rider to become a passenger in their own momentum. This is where the spiritual clarity begins, not in transcendence, but in forced attention. Riding nowhere is not the same as aimless riding. Aimlessness implies lack. Riding nowhere can be a discipline. It can be intentional without being instrumental. The rider may choose a route, a surface, a gear, a time of day, a set of constraints, but the purpose is not arrival, the purpose is encounter. Encounter with terrain, encounter with effort, encounter within the body, encounter with absurdity. This is why tracklocross can feel meditative without becoming serene. It is not the calm meditation of incense cushions and soft bells. It is a meditation conducted by drivetrain. Attention is demanded, not invited. The rider cannot drift too far into thought because the trail keeps throwing small legal notices at the front wheel. Roots, stones, puddles, cambers, hidden holes. They present moments that are not just a concept, but are consequence. On a fixed gear bike, this attention intensifies. The inability to coast removes a layer of psychological escape. The body must remain within the machine. Every change in terrain travels through the pedals. The bike speaks continuously, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in little legal threats. This creates a form of embodied immediacy that is difficult to replicate on more forgiving machines. The fixed gear bike does not merely carry the rider through space, it binds them to the consequences of their motion. There is no grand objective to rescue the suffering from absurdity. The suffering is allowed to be absurd. The mud is allowed to be mud. The climb is allowed to be too steep. The bike is allowed to be too wrong. The rider is allowed to laugh. The laughter matters. Without laughter, tracklocross becomes puritanism on wheels. This laughter, it becomes a serious joke, which is one of the finest philosophical forms available to humans. To define tracklocross as a sport is not wrong, but it may be incomplete. It has sport-like qualities, skill, effort, style, terrain, challenge, community, equipment, and technique, but its deeper appeal may lie elsewhere. Tracklocross is also a meditative rejection of progress-orientated life. It refuses the idea that the best bicycle is always the most capable bicycle. It refuses the idea that difficulty must be minimised. It refuses the idea that rides must be justified through distance, speed, or destination. It refuses the idea that technology's role is always to remove friction. It refuses the idea that the rider's task is to become more efficient at all costs. This refusal is not nostalgia. It is not a claim that older or simpler bikes are morally superior. The point is not that fixed gear is better than modern technology. The point is that fixed gear creates a different philosophical situation. It changes the question. A modern gravel bike asks, how can this terrain be ridden well? A tracklocross bike asks, what happens when riding well is no longer the main point? This question allows failure to become part of the practice without an interruption. Dabbing a foot, walking a section, slipping out, turning back, choosing the wrong line, laughing at the wrongness of the machine, these are not necessary defeats. They are evidence that the rider has entered a space where ordinary measures have weakened. Tracklocross makes room for the anti-achievement. The anti-achievement is not laziness. It is not apathy. It is an achievement that cannot be converted into status very easily. A ride to nowhere. A trail abandoned because it became a swamp with ambitions to suck you into a deep nebulous void. A skid that achieved nothing except a brief dirty revelation. A loop so inefficient it resembles a philosophical diagram drawn by a beetle. These experiences resist commodification. They are hard to explain, hard to rank, hard to display without flattening them into content. Their value is local, bodily, immediate. They belong to the rider because they do not matter much to anyone else. That privacy is part of the sacred. If we turn our philosophical lens to a climb, the climb is where geographic nihilism becomes most concentrated. On a normal ride, a climb often functions as a passage. You climb to reach the top. the view, the descent, the next valley, the completed route. On a fixed gear bike, especially when you're off-road, the climb becomes less a passage than an ordeal with a very small vocabulary. There is no gear to save you, there is no seated spinning at a forgiving cadence, there is only the ratio you brought. The climb strips away narrative. At sufficient difficulty, the mind stops composing explanations, it narrows breath, pressure, balance, traction, the front wheel lifting slightly, the rear tyre searching for purchase, the pedals refusing to negotiate with you, the body discovering obscure departments of fatigue that you did not even realise existed. Here, the purposelessness of the ride becomes vital. If the climb led to some grand destination, the mind might escape into anticipation. But when the climb leads nowhere in particular, there is no future reward large enough to distract from the present. The climb is not a means, it is the whole ugly jewel. This is an enlightenment by reduction. Not enlightenment as bliss, enlightenment as the removal of unnecessary decoration. The rider is reduced to effort, the bike is reduced to function, the landscape is reduced to gradient and surface. The self, usually so busy narrating itself, becomes quieter, not gone, but quieter. For a few moments, identity thins into action. In the raw friction of the climb, the rider does not transcend the body, they return to it. The return is the spiritual pursuit. This brings us to the paradox of geographic nihilism, which is the seeking nothing does not produce emptiness, it produces contact. When the destination is stripped away, the ride does not become meaningless, rather, meaning stops being outsourced to the endpoint. It reappears in smaller, stranger places. The sound of grit against the downtube, the smell of wet leaves, the cosmic dread of a steepening track, the satisfaction of holding cadence over broken ground, the tiny ceremony of unclipping mud from a tyre, the weird dignity of walking, the turn at the dead end, the skid that becomes a confession. To seek nothing is to stop bullying the ride into significance. The ride is allowed to exist. The rider is allowed to exist within it without proving anything. This is not passive. Tracklocross is physically demanding, technically awkward, and occasionally humiliating. But its demand is not the same as the demand of achievement culture. It does not say, become better so you can be worth more. It says, pay attention because this is happening. That may be the deepest freedom it offers. The geographic nihilist does not need the route to form a heroic act. The ride can be a broken sentence, a loop, a lurch, a bad idea, a muddy parenthesis. The bicycle can be unsuitable. The surface can be hostile. The endpoint can be irrelevant. The data can be ignored. The map can be wrong. The climb can be pointless. And still there is the turning of the cranks. Still there is body and weather. Still there is a wheel insisting upon contact with the earth. And still there is nowhere to go and therefore no failure to arrive. Tracklocross teaches that the destination was never the soul of the ride. It was only one possible excuse. By stripping away utility, comfort, efficiency, and sometimes common sense, Tracklocross reveals a more immediate form of cycling experience. The fixed gear bike does not flatter the rider with endless options. The muddy trail does not reward the rider with smooth progress. The dead end does not redeem the rider with a rival. Together they create a particularly spiritual machine, useless, difficult, tactile, cosmic, and strangely pure. Geographic nihilism is not despair. It is not the belief that places do not matter. It is the belief that places need not justify themselves by becoming destinations. A trail to nowhere can be more profound than a famous road if it returns the rider to attention. A pointless climb can be more honest than a planned achievement if it removes the illusion of mastery. A locked skid in the mud can be more revealing than a perfect line if it exposes the delicate treaty between will and the world. The ultimate tracklocross spiritual pursuit is not to conquer distance, complete the route, or arrive transformed at some scenic coordinate. It is to ride into the unnecessary, to pedal through absurdity, to laugh at the wrongness of the bike, to enter the void of the map and discover that the void has texture, to seek nothing and in seeking nothing find the whole filthy cathedral of experience waiting underneath your tyres.